Dark Souls has become one of the largest household names in all of video games, from its distinct dark settings to the infamous difficult gameplay.
How you doing down there?
It's a game that has captivated gamers' hearts from all across the globe, with the entire series selling nearly 100 million copies worldwide. Holy shit. From the original trilogy to the newest game in the franchise, Elden Ring, all the games have their fans, even with the arguably worst game in the franchise having its own devout following. Yet, out of all of the games, I have seen none of them having such a dedicated following as the topic of today's video, Bloodborne. Bloodborne is in a very interesting situation. Despite no content being released for the game since 2015, its fan base is still very active. Speaking anecdotally, at least once a week on Twitter, I refuse to call it X, screw you Musk, I see hashtag Bloodborne trending, either with people begging for it to be ported to PC or with some absolutely stellar artwork. The game has left quite the legacy, some people considering it the best Souls game, and with others, me included to be honest, it was the reason to buy a PlayStation 4 back in the day. But why? What did Bloodborne do that was so special that it still has fans clamoring for a port or a remaster or for FromSoft/Sony to do anything with it? Well, let's talk about it. But first, please take a moment to press that subscribe button. We're trying to hit 10,000 subs by the end of the year, and it'd mean the world to me if you took just a second out of your day to help me out. Alright, back to the video. The game starts off and it already feels distinct from the rest of the series. It has a much more intense and, I would say, foreboding atmosphere. While Dark Souls is far from warm and welcoming as it takes place in a kingdom that is quickly dying and desperately attempting to cling onto what little life it has left, Bloodborne makes you feel fear. But to truly describe why, we're going to need to get into it. As we start the game, we're greeted by this lovely gentleman who is apparently giving us a blood transfusion. For what purpose? Who can say? But we're not being given this blood for charity, we're being given a job to do. What job is that? We're out to hunt beast. You might be wondering, what kind of beast are we hunting? Werewolves? Worse.
Oi, this bloke don't got a license.
British werewolves. Bone chilling. First things first though, we need to design our playable character here, and of course, as a seasoned Bloodborne veteran, I design only the most serious and badass of characters. Perfect. Now we just need to select a starting class and we're off. Well, after having a bad trip with these things climbing on us, we wake up alone in the clinic with not a soul in sight, and it seems like the hunt is on. So we start by taking a step outside this door and...
Hello, governor. Bit daft, ain't it, bruv?
That'll show them. But as much fun as it is to kill the British with... we're going to need a proper weapon if we want to go about this at least somewhat efficiently. Well, no weapons in here, so we make our way out, making sure to grab a few items on the way, including our very first blood vials. This is a somewhat controversial change from the other games in the series. These blood vials are our healing items. Unlike an Estus flask, they're one-time use. You inject yourself with healing, better hope you really needed it because you're not getting it back. This is a change I'm personally mixed on. The obvious benefit is that you can find more blood vials throughout the level, giving you less reasons to have to stop and restock. But the obvious downside is that, well, you're gonna run out. You can stock up a couple hundred, but in reality, if you're struggling with a boss and just dying over and over and over again, eventually you're going to run out and have to grind out more, which, believe me, is frustrating. There's a few guides out there on the best spots to farm, especially with a certain mechanic later on in the game, but we haven't gotten there yet. For now, just be prepared to kill whoever you come across and try to take as little damage as possible, or as the kids say, get good. Aw, nuts. Well, it's not all bad. Once we've experienced our first death, we wake up in what's known as the Hunter's Dream. Here, we're introduced to a man named Gurman, a kindly older man who doesn't have much to say for now, other than giving us a nice slap on the tush and telling us to get out there and hunt some beast. Huh. That's interesting. Well, anyhow, we collect our weapons and make our way back to Yharnam, ready to start properly hunting some beast. As we take the tombstone back to Yharnam, new cleaver in hand, we can properly give the locals the customary English handshake. Once we've lowered the ladder and made our way up, we light our very first lantern of the game. These are essentially just the bonfires of the game, and if you're unfamiliar with Dark Souls lingo, basically it's a checkpoint. However, this is something I don't see talked about often, but I think these are a downgrade from the staple bonfires. With the bonfires from the other games, you just sit down, refuel your stuff, maybe level up, and then move on with your day. The lanterns allow us to teleport back to the Hunter's Dream in order to do all the things previously listed, meaning we have to sit through a loading screen. At launch, this was horrible. Seriously, if you have a PS4, downpatch the game to 1.0 and see how long the loading screens last. It is miserable. Unfortunately, the game doesn't seem to load for me at all on PS5 if I attempt to do this, which is all I have at the moment because I gave my friend my PlayStation 4. Fun fact, I was trying to learn the speedrun at one point, but since I gave away my PS4, I no longer have this option. Tangent aside, even though the load screens are much quicker these days with the latest patch, that does not prevent the amount of loading screens you'll see just going back to restock. While it's only 3 to 5 seconds, that time quickly adds up with how often you'll be coming back to your home base. These days, I'm used to it, but I feel the past games did this much better. Lantern discussion aside, we go to the nearby window and see this red lantern nearby? Right here? That means there's someone to talk to here, and being the sociable gent I am, I stop by to say hello. This man here is named Gilbert, and he tells us that, like a lot of people, he's come here for a magic healing blood distributed by the church, said to be capable of healing any number of ailments or physical injury. And the fact that we can see this via the gameplay, I believe, is a clever touch. Well, with our conversation over, we head over to Yharnam proper and start cleaning the streets, hunting as it were, and decide to make our way down this alleyway with a big friend here, and we decide to handle him with a well-timed parry and visceral attack. And this is a fun mechanic. Now, this is nothing new to the Dark Souls franchise. Parrying has been a thing since Demon Souls, but the brutality of and the violent nature of Bloodborne's take on it is, in my opinion, the best iteration in the series, as you reach into your prey's insides with your bare hands and just rip out their intestines. God damn, it is satisfying. I'll also take this moment to talk about guns and weapons in general. Now, you might see a gat and think, oh, this game's gonna be easy. All I gotta do is whip out the 9mm and shoot everyone like it's COD. Wrong. Your gun does piss for damage. You may as well just call them a poo-poo head. Your gun is there for one reason and one reason only, to parry, which I love. It's a very violent take on the iconic mechanic where you would typically take a shield and just wave it in front of your opponent's face to throw them off in the other games. That's not how we do things down in Yharnam. We pull out the gat and shoot them in the face at the exact right time to throw them off balance. There is a shield in the game, if you're interested, but even the game itself tells you that it's useless. That means we're playing the game like real men. We get in their face and get aggressive. We don't block attacks here, we dodge, which is now this really cool shonen anime dash when you're locked on. If you're not, you still roll, but most of the time you should be dashing. Speaking of aggression, this game really wants you in your opponent's face. You see, if you do get hit, you have a few seconds to remedy that, you idiot, using a mechanic unique to this game known as rallying. See that orange bar? Yeah, that's the health you just lost, right? Well, it's still orange. Go out and hit something. The pure ecstasy of watching the British scream in pain will simply close your wounds and give you the vigor to continue the good fight, just like our ancestors before us. This, to some people, can be considered a bad thing as it greatly limits your way of playing the game. While the series is known for its varied playstyles, from spell slinger to unmovable tank, there is a single way to play Bloodborne, which is fast and aggressive. This, compounded with the fact that Bloodborne has less weapons to play around with, leads many to say that the game has less replay value than its siblings. While I personally don't have this issue, I can understand the gripe. Personally speaking, I'd rather have one refined playstyle the entire game is designed around, rather than having a hodgepodge of different playstyles, with some of them being better than others in terms of game design. Not saying any of the different ways to play Dark Souls are wrong though, they're fun to experiment with, even if they're not quote-unquote optimal. Except miracles. If you use miracles, you are objectively wrong. I touched on it briefly in the previous section, but let's take a moment to talk about the main weapons of Bloodborne. Sorry for all the comparisons, I promise this will be the last one for now, but compared to Dark Souls, yes, Bloodborne has far less weapons, and on the surface, this seems like a bad thing, but in my opinion, Bloodborne has a far better selection of weapons than its predecessor. Dark Souls has a lot of weapons, yes, but realistically, it had different weapon types, with some weapons that just had different stats, some of which were just objectively better than others. For example, say you were using a classic straight sword. Realistically, you're not going to notice a difference between the broadsword and the sunlight straight sword out of one doing more damage. Otherwise, they're just clones of each other. Bloodborne goes for a quality over quantity approach. No two weapons play anything like each other, with the exception of the saw cleaver and the saw spear. But other than that one exception, every weapon is so unique, and each and every weapon has two different modes to play with using the trick system. Unlike Dark Souls, this isn't just the choice of holding your weapon in one hand or two hands. The attacks you have access to are entirely different, with even a unique attack if you trick your weapon in the middle of an attack. It's honestly a super cool mechanic, and I'm sad it has never made a return. So while it might seem like you have less options, and to be honest, maybe you do, I wouldn't exactly say you're starved of them. Every weapon is unique, and there is no such thing as a bad weapon. You find a cool axe, try it out. Try out both modes. Do it for all the weapons. Find something you like and just spam the hell out of it. Nothing is unviable. Every weapon has its purpose, and I love that. There is no weapon you use for a haha challenge I'm going to gimp myself run. Maybe to some that's a loss, but I'm just happy that all the weapons are worth using. Moving on, let's get back to the actual game. As we clean up the streets of Yharnam, one Londoner at a time, we come across this 300 hours in the game, by the way. Well, either way, we make our way down to the sewers, and there's not much going on here other than more beasts and some rats. But as we make our way down and deal with our final beastmen, we get our swag, the iconic hunter's gear. To diverge a little bit and talk about gear, just wear whatever you want, bro. It literally does not matter. Yeah, there are some stat changes and different defenses for different things, but take it from me, it really doesn't matter. The difference you get in defense is practically non-existent. Unless you go out of your way to absolutely min-max a specific fight, it will not stop you from dying. And even if you did go out of your way to min-max your armor for a specific fight, you might live a hit with like 1 hit point. It's just not worth it. You find something that looks cool, just wear it. There's a reason weight isn't a stat in this game. Anyhow, drip acquired, we climb back onto the streets of Yharnam and get back to hunting. Anything from the typical normal citizen to big doggo boys, and sometimes even weird crow things. It's fun, but before marching on, make sure to come down here and open up some shortcuts. This will be useful in a moment, trust me. Once we've cleared up the streets and opened our shortcut back to the lantern here, it's time we make our way down this street to this inconspicuous looking empty road. Oh no! Oh, a boss fight! This here is the Cleric Beast, as I'm sure you can no doubt tell by the name at the bottom of the screen. Well, welcome to boss fights, buddy boy. A fun fact, you can actually hear it scream when you first climb the ladder up to the first lantern if you're listening closely. A nice touch and some foreshadowing. The lore behind the beast is pretty simple, as its name sort of gives it away. It was a cleric for the healing church back when it was a human, and somehow it's a horrifying sight and your first real hint that the healing church is hiding something from the good people of Yharnam, and maybe they have something to do with this terrible beast scourge. But hey, I don't want to judge. Regardless, this guy needs to be taken down. Or not. It's your choice, in all honesty. It's a completely optional boss. Now, that's bold. The very first boss you can encounter in the game, arguably the most iconic, is entirely skippable, but I doubt that's something you'd know on your first playthrough. As for the fight itself, it's tense, it's not exactly difficult, and there are a couple of cheese strats if you want to make it a bit easier for yourself, if you are so inclined. Namely, grabbing some oil and Molotov cocktails on the way here, chucking them at the boss in that order, and watching his health get absolutely chunked as a result, assuming you land the cocktails. I swear, this shit misses half the time. But even if you don't do that, it's not difficult. Just stay away from his research hand, dodge away from it, and give him a few slaps on the tush, and eventually he'll go down. For the first boss, I'd say we're off to a really solid start. I think it's fairly challenging as a new player without being frustrating. Of course, as a Bloodborne vet, I take him down first try, but I absolutely still love and appreciate the music, the aesthetics, and the atmosphere. Beast slain, we see the iconic prey slaughtered screen, which I absolutely love. Nothing quite like coming down from the high of killing a boss just to be told by the game you really showed him, as well as receiving our Sword Hunter badge. So these badges will drop throughout the game, and they're important. Teleporting back to the Hunter's Dream with this conveniently placed lantern here, we can come to this fountain, and with our new badge in hand, it unlocks new items for us to buy. And this can range from weapons to gear to consumables, and even sometimes key items. Of course, since we're back in the Hunter's Dream, you also probably notice this. The doll is up and active now. You may be wondering, how? Well, you probably didn't notice it, but when we saw the Cleric Beast for the first time, the number next to the eyeball icon went up. That's referred to as insight, and it has a few different purposes, but for now, to explain it quickly, it's essentially our ability to perceive and understand the strange things happening in the world, and fun fact, the game world itself will change the more insight you have. You'll be able to see things you couldn't before, and certain enemies will gain new attacks or be more difficult overall the more insight you have. It's a very cool mechanic. The more you understand, the more susceptible you are to creatures that mess with your mind, but the less likely things are able to hide from you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, all you need to know is that having insight allows us to talk to this doll, and while she's a nice lady admittedly, we're much more interested in what she does for us mechanically. This doll is how we level up. As we kill enemies throughout the game, or use these cold blood dews we find lying around, we gather things called blood echoes, which are basically just experience points, or souls if you're familiar with the rest of the Dark Souls franchise. Using these, we can allocate points to different stats and level up. It's standard stuff, and if you're at all familiar with the franchise, you will know that if you die, you lose whatever echoes you had. But if you can manage to get to the point where you died, you can pick up what you lost. It's pretty standard stuff, and while Dark Souls did popularize it, it's been in quite a few different games since. For example, Shovel Knight. But a mechanic unique to Bloodborne is that there is a chance an enemy will pick up the echoes you left behind, and in order to get them back, you're going going to need to kill that guy. I actually really enjoy this edition, if I'm honest. It adds more to the aggression feeling. There is no avoiding fights here. You are encouraged at every turn to kill and slaughter everything that dares get in your way. Thankfully though, bosses cannot pick up your echoes, so if you die there, you can still get your stuff without having to kill the boss. Moving on from mechanics, let's go back to Yharnam and handle this beast infestation. As we travel back to the bloodied streets of Yharnam, killing beast and having a real PETA moment, as we make our way down into the depths, we come across this door here, and feeling sociable, I decide to strike up a conversation. After having a chat with the very nice lady on the other side of the door here, she asks us if we happen to know any safe havens she could go to for the night, as it seems she's not going to be able to keep the beast out for too much longer. And as much as I would like to help this woman out, truly I would, I unfortunately don't know any safe places at the moment. Bad news delivered, she tells us to fuck off, and fuck off we shall. As we travel along these rafters, we find a small door blocked off by easily breakable crates and vases. Smashing them, we see this person in a crow cosplay, but considering they're not attacking us on sight, I'd say it's safe to assume they're friendly. So stopping by to give a quick chat, we find ourselves talking to Eileen the Crow, who I'm not entirely sure ever actually introduces herself properly. To tell you the truth, I'm not sure how we know her name is Eileen, but yes, that is her name. Eileen is kind enough to give us some bold hunter marks, which are basically just a go back to base for free button and an emote, which is cool. I like her a lot, but confession time. I messed up her quest line, so we won't be going over it this time, which is a shame because it's one of my favorites. But what can you do? Eileen chatted to. We decide it's best to move on because, as she says,
a hunter must hunt.
So, before traversing down into the sewers, make sure to hit these two chained bodies down. Clearing things out and making our way down, we grab our swag we just knocked off those chains, including the saw spear, which is, the saw cleaver we have at home. But we already talked about that. Eventually, traveling through the sewers, swatting these guys on the ground and killing some birds, we run into a new pig friend, my favorite enemy. So, another mechanic, backstabs. These are in every Souls game, including this one, but they work differently from previous games. In the other games, you would simply press the attack button on the back and you'd get a pat on the back and the animation. A good job. You did it. Bloodborne makes you work for that shit though. You want that backstab? You're gonna get behind the guy and fully charge your heavy attack. If you land that on the back, then you get your backstab. Why do I bring that up? Because this. Now that was well earned. Pig stabbed, we climb up this ladder here and kill a troll before stopping by this red lantern window and talk to an innocent sounding girl. Apparently her father and mother have gone out for the night and she asks us if we can find them since her mom forgot the music box that helps keep dad from going goblin mode. We best hurry before something bad happens. So we tell the girl everything is going to be okay, I assume, silent protagonist, so I have to fill it in for the guy, and we make our way back and reclimb the ladders back through Yharnam, making sure to deal with this guy so he can't Indiana Jones us later. Traveling back through the bridge, we stop by this elevator, unlocking us a shortcut back to the very first lantern. It's actually crazy how much they can milk a single checkpoint in this game. Before we continue on, I decide to head back to the Hunter's Dream. You may have noticed while traveling through the game, we pick up these things called bloodstone shards. These are important. Basically, our weapon can also level up, and this is the material we need to make that happen. Leveling up your weapon is pretty straightforward. It just makes it do more damage, maybe it scales off your stats better, but there's not really a choice in it, and it's something you really want to do. It's the standard stuff. That aside, we make our way back to the bridge and up these stairs where we meet a very kindly gentleman currently chopping up his local townspeople. You'll love to see it. It's here where we start the second boss of the game. This is Father Gascoigne. He is an interesting boss, starting off with his own axe and gun, fighting much like any hunter would. I highly recommend you drag him upstairs, as it makes dodging much easier when you're not constantly bumping into the many gravestones littering the battlefield. As we take Daddy Linguini upstairs, we do stock standard human stuff for Bloodborne. His attacks are wild, but we get in close, maybe parry, and hit him hard. One thing though, remember that music box we got? Well, play that and watch as Papa Fettuccini has a freak out moment clutching his head in pain. You can do this a total of 3 times, but as a real gamer, I chose not to do this except this one time just to show off the mechanic. As we get Padre Pepperoni to about half health, he turns into a beast, and in this form, much like you would expect, he gets more aggressive, hits harder, and has a brand new moveset. It can be rough as a new player, but if you time your gunshots right and make sure to use this fall point to your advantage so you can take time to heal, it's not too bad. Father Gascoigne slayed, we make sure to grab this red brooch off this woman here, and, well, if it's not obvious, this is the wife of Father Gascoigne, and mother to the little girl who asked us to search for her parents. Gascoigne's story is a tragedy. He was an established hunter for many years, and an esteemed member of the church. But funnily enough, the name Father is not a title officially recognized by the Healing Church of Yharnam, implying he was also a high-ranking clergyman of another church before moving to Yharnam, where he met his wife and started a family, one where he seemed happy. But as the hunts grew, and as he went out at night more and more, he couldn't help but start to become the very beast he was sworn to destroy. But as he got more and more bloodthirsty, more and more violent, his wife was always there to play the music box that reminded him of his family, of what he had, and it was always enough to bring him back to the loving husband and father he was meant to be. It's why it seems like he's in pain when we play the music box in this fight. It's heavily implied that Father Gascoigne either killed his own wife in a fit of bloodlust and rage, or one of the many Yharnamites that we see him chopping up in the cutscene was responsible. But either way, he doesn't want to remember what happened. It's a genuine tragedy. It should be noticed at this point that you can take the brooch back to the little girl who gave us the music box, giving her the bad news that both of her parents are dead, but I never have the heart to do this. I know, you call me a fake gamer, but this ends up leading to an entire side quest with an ending that I just don't want to have to go through, okay? I think that's enough tragedy in the Gascoigne family. Besides, I have a much better use for this brooch in just a moment. As we open the gates with our newly acquired key and climb this ladder here, we're greeted by a chest in the corner of the room. Opening it, we find ourselves now the proud owner of a blood gem workshop tool. What's that, you might ask? Well, every weapon has these slots on them in various shapes. The more you level up your weapon, the more slots open up to you, and using those slots, we can insert gems and get various different bonuses. On paper, this sounds interesting because it seems like you can customize your weapon, but in reality, you're just going to pick the gems that give you more damage because there is no reason to go for anything else. A missed opportunity, but what can you do? Also, that brooch, you can smash it and get a really good early game blood gem. A real gamer moment. A little girl who just lost both her parents and we got her mom's precious brooch. Should we return it to her so she has something to remember her mother by? Nah, bro, I need more damage. Also, while we're in the hunter's dream, we can stop by this messenger bath nearby the workshop. Remember how I said insight has a few different uses? Well, this is another one. We can use it as a currency at this shop as we travel throughout the game. Sometimes when you kill certain bosses or NPCs, or honestly just random moments, this shop will stock up with new items. For example, after we killed Father Gascoigne, we can now purchase his armor from the store, and considering he was daddy material, I think it's a pretty sound investment. Continuing on through the building, we find ourselves in a chapel surrounded by urns and greeted by this man? Well, despite his looks, he seems like a nice fella, and he asks us a favor. As we're out and about hunting beasts, if we happen to see anyone in need of a safe place to stay the night, that we should send them on over to Odeon Chapel. Now, you might remember, there was an old woman looking for somewhere to go, so we decide to stop by and tell her about this place, and she shows us nothing but gratitude for going out of our way to make sure she's safe. Moving on, we actually have a couple of places we could go to at this point depending on if we have certain items or not. Namely, if we have the Hunter Chief emblem that you can purchase from the Hunter's Dream once you have the Sword Hunter badge from killing the Cleric Beast. But it's about 10,000 echoes to purchase, and we're a bit strapped for cash because I'm using it to buy levels and blood vials. So through the back alleys we go instead. As we continue down, we eventually come across another building, and clearing it out, we come across a couple of points of interest. This lever, which we of course pull without thinking about, and a new friend here. His name is Alfred, and he gives us some lore about the world of Bloodborne. Namely, that the healing church is where all the healing blood is ministered, which, you know, we already knew that, so thanks, Alfred. I appreciate you rehashing that for me. More interestingly, though, he tells us about a place named Bergenworth, a college. But this isn't your usual college. They don't go here for 4 years to get a degree they'd never use while also chugging down Bud Light. No. This was the place that discovered tombs underneath Yharnam, which led to the founding of the healing church, as these tombs were the origin of the magical healing blood. Unfortunately, the college is abandoned in the middle of a forest now, so no study groups for us. Lastly, Alfred tells us about the corrupted Vilebloods, the sworn enemies of Alfred and his master. A Bergenworth scholar brought back forbidden blood to a place known as Canehurst Castle. He doesn't explain why this blood is forbidden or what special properties it has in comparison to the regular healing blood, but he does let us know that the original Vileblood is still alive and ruling to this day, and Alfred has taken it upon himself to find a way to Canehurst Castle and deal with them himself, as he believes that is what his master would want. After our conversation, I decide to leave Alfred be. He seems like a very busy man, and I don't want to take too much of his time, so let's talk about that lever we pulled earlier. Pulling that caused the secret staircase to open up down here, and I say we should take a gander. Descending down, we eventually come across these large double doors. The door attempts to stop us with a sign posted on it, but it won't stop me because I can't read. So we open the doors to Old Yharnam. As we step out into the street, we are told to leave once again, but this time it's by someone yelling across the city rather than through text. But regardless, we still choose to ignore his warning. This time though, the man means business, and as we continue to ignore his warnings and commands, this man just starts raining bullets down on us with a machine gun. Where did he even get this thing? This is easily one of the most memorable and somewhat frustrating parts of the game, is you have to go from cover to cover dodging machine gun fire and killing any beast that stands between you and the madman with a turret. Eventually, we make our way there and start climbing this ridiculously long ladder where we find ourselves face to face with our assailant. This is Jura, a now retired hunter, and he is a tough son of a bitch. A lot of health, and he hits like an absolute Alright. Bye, Jura. To tell you the truth, this is probably the way most people can take this guy down. He is not easy. There is another path to get to this point, one where you can actually speak and have a conversation with Jura and learn some of his story. Basically, he was a hunter, much like us once, slaying beasts and saving people as far as he was aware anyway, but during his hunt, he found that all the beasts that he was forced to kill were actually people. It might have something to do with the purging of Old Yharnam. Maybe that was just a step too far for him, and as a result, he has locked himself with the beast here to protect them from hunters like us. As he says, they're no danger to those above, and as far as the game is concerned, we never have to set foot here. Perhaps we are the monsters, coming here purely for the sport of the hunt, killing beasts who are no danger to anyone. But the night goes on, and we don't have time to worry about moral quandaries. Also, killing him is how we get the powder keg badge, which opens up some interesting weapons for us to buy. Moving on, we climb down and give this second, not nearly as interesting hunter a thorough go thrashing, namely by cheesing his AI around the staircase here. No, I do not have any shame. Leave me alone. As we traverse down this burned building and step inside, dealing with the ridiculous amount of beast in here, we find an interesting note saying, "The red moon hangs low, and beast rule the streets." Are we left with no other choice than to burn it all to cinders? This, paired with the charred hunter set we find nearby, one of my favorite sets by the way, implies that Jura, to some extent, was involved with what happened to Old Yarnum, that he, as the note says, burned it all to cinders. And after burning countless thousands of people, I can understand why he might have become disillusioned to the hunt, but keep in mind what it said about the red moon. Traveling further into Old Yarnum, we eventually happen upon this open field, and there's this interesting red glow happening here. So this is the final mechanic of Insight. Every Souls game, you have the option to summon people to help you with the game. These can be actual people if you're playing online, or NPCs if you're playing offline. As I'm choosing to play offline for this playthrough, namely because I don't want to deal with invasions, even if this community is far from active these days, this summon is an NPC. This time it's our old buddy Alfred. Hey, what's up, Alfred? You'll notice that summoning him, our insight goes down. That's right, insight is also a currency used to summon help. It's not too terrible, and later in the game, if you really need to, there are ways to farm insight. Alright, I ain't no casual. You get out of here, Alf. We're fighting these bosses mano a mano, like real gamer chads. As we step into this church, would you believe it, there's a boss fight. I know, a summon sign right outside a boss room. Who'd have thunk it? Well, for this boss, I decided to use a speedrun strat because, well, it's fun. So I quickly eat a beast blood pellet, which, if you're unaware, it makes us hit harder at the cost of us taking more damage if we're hit back. Then I set my weapon on fire and throw a pungent cocktail into the corner so my man gets distracted and we can just wallop him for free, rinse and repeat, and the blood-starved beast goes down in no time. I don't have any interesting lore for this guy. There's not a ton to say about him, but killing him we do receive the Tutera Chalice. One of those things. Don't you worry. I'll have more to say about that later. But for now, we're done with Old Yarnum. As a side note, I did go ahead and pick up the Hunter Chief emblem, but if you clear out Old Yarnum, you don't need to do this because for some reason, when you kill the blood-starved beast, this door in the Odeon Chapel opens up. Why? The hell if I know. I failed to see the connection between the two, but it does open up a new path for us. Using this elevator, you'd think we'd just ride it to the top and go along our merry way? My friend, if you think that, then you've never played a Souls game. Miyazaki is a sick son of a bitch, and often he will hide secret paths on elevator rides. So no, this is not a good time to put the controller down and scratch your head. We got places to be. To be honest, it's not the end of the world if you miss this secret. You just miss out on this funny, hat we can put on our messengers. Looking good, guys. And this weird Odeon thing we can't do anything with at the moment. It's definitely worth coming up here if you're a completionist, but nothing too terrible if you end up missing it. Anyway, actually riding the elevator up, not scoping things out for hidden paths, we're instantly greeted by another kindly gentleman with a large gun and plenty of other gents hanging around wanting to kill us. Ignoring them for now, we find this cool little critter. You know, the guys who drop bloodstone shards, and I kill him. Now, don't pick up what he dropped just yet. I'm gonna show you guys a fun glitch you can do. Run back, don't teleport, don't die, to the spot where we killed Daddy Gestapo and booped this lamp. Lamp booped, run, don't teleport or die, back to where we saw that critter and kill him again. Rinse and repeat as much as you'd like, then go and pick up the bloodstone shards he drops. In this case, twin stone shards, which I might have gone overboard with. Was there a specific reason I did this? Not really. I just felt like showing off the glitch, but it's far from necessary because the game gives you more stone shards of all types than you know what to do with. Once we've gotten all the twin shards we need, we finally climb up this tower, killing whatever stands between us and our destination. We manage to reach the top of the tower where we find a door that won't open, of course, but also a Radiant Hunter badge. Oh yeah, let's go. Taking this, I immediately head back to the Hunter's Dream so I can purchase my new Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Oh, we all know where this is going. Okay, now I can purchase my new weapon. For this run, I decided to use one of my favorite weapons, and the weapon I used for my very first playthrough way back in the day. Fun fact, it's a good weapon, and if you're coming from Dark Souls and used to using a great sword or ultra great sword, it's probably the weapon I'd recommend the most as it's the closest to those weapons. And thanks to all that grinding I just did, we can instantly get our weapon to +5. Aw, yeah. With that out of the way, we take the elevator back up, and this time, instead of climbing up, we jump down to this area here where we have plenty of rafters and rickety platforms. Though, if you have a keen eye, you might notice a door on one of these platforms. Through massive gamer skills, we managed to land on front of the door first try. I am a gaming god! Stepping inside, we find ourselves in a rather familiar area. Welcome back to the workshop. Or it'd probably be more accurate to say, welcome to the original workshop. Keep in mind, the workshop where we level up is referred to by several NPCs to be a dream. So I think it's safe to say this workshop is what that dream is based off of. Exploring around, we find a few points of interest. Namely, we grab this doll swag. Oh yeah, now we're looking good. As well as finding the real life version of Gurman's weirdly lifelike doll, and the most important item to grab here is the umbilical cord. What's this do? More on that later. Getting to the bottom of this tower and killing this beast, we're given another one of these weird runes we can't use at the moment, but keep it in the back of your mind. Traveling through the back streets here, As we wake up, we find ourselves in a brand new area, which was entirely on purpose, I assure you. I definitely did not die by accident or get caught off guard. No, sir, I'm a real gamer. I never die in this game, or any game for that matter. Luckily, nobody bothered locking the jail cell we were thrown into, so we can just walk on out. Exploring the local jail, we happen upon this woman who's freaking out in a corner in prayer. As we attempt to talk to her, it seems that we have no Riz, but you know who did have Riz? That's right, Father Gascoigne. Putting on our drip, it works like a charm. She's instantly head over heels for us, and we're able to send her back to our place where it's safe. Joking aside, this is Adela, a nun for the Healing Church, and as a result of being kidnapped and surrounded by Beast, she will only talk to members of the church, which is why we needed Gascoigne's outfit for her to talk to us. But there are a few different outfits you can wear, namely any outfit that is associated with the Healing Church, which include all the ones you see on screen now, but the one you're most likely to have at this point is Father Gascoigne's, because it's the one you have access to the soonest. But stepping out in our proper attire after rizzing up Adela, we explore Yar Hargul, which outside of this church isn't much at this point in the game, but there is one place of interest. Down in the basement with other kidnapped victims, we find a couple of other snatchers guarding this hole in the wall, and, well, considering the city has nowhere else to go in, I decide to hop in and have a gander. Traveling down this pathway, we see a massively empty field in the distance. Oh boy, I sure doubt anything bad would happen here. This boss is Parl, and they're not too bad. The trick to this boss is to just Okay, admittedly, this boss took me a bit longer than I'd like to admit to take out. It's really not that tough of a boss, but boy, let me tell you, by the time I had finished it off, I was done with it. The main trick with them is to just hit their legs, knock them down, hit their head, and maybe get a visceral attack if you're a good boy. The boss isn't hard, they just did a lot more damage than my character could handle at this point because of my piss poor vigor stat. But as the kids say, just get Moving on from Pearl, we open the door behind them and we're back in Old Yarnum. But for now, there's nothing left to do here, so we head back to the Odeon Chapel as we have work to do there. We find Adela here in the church where she seems happy to see us and informs us that she can help us throughout our adventure in Yarnum by giving us some of her own blood. This blood heals, much like our regular blood, but with a special property. Namely, it gives us a bit of a health regen after we inject it. Sadly, we can't just carry around dozens of this stuff because if you attempt to ask for more while you're still carrying the vial she gave you, she'll simply tell you that she's too drained and you'll need to wait for more. Don't worry, it's not one and done. You can come get another as soon as you use the original vial. I just never did because I never used the damn vial. It's just how my brain works. I'm given a thing that is really scarce and better than regular thing. I think, oh, I should save this for an emergency, and then said emergency never shows itself. Moving on, we go back to the abandoned workshop we were at and hop on down to the cathedral ward where we were when we got kidnapped. Moving through the streets, clearing out beasts, we happen upon another new enemy. Unlike everyone else we've seen so far who is more beast-like than anything, this guy is much more alien in appearance with tentacles coming out of their face. If you're familiar with D&D, or perhaps with the newly released Baldur's Gate, these things are essentially mind flayers. Namely, as they grab you, they'll give your head the big suck and take your inside away in the process. Other than that, we just ride this elevator here, and as we reach the tip top, we can jump down and open the gate back to the Odeon Chapel, now able to continue on from our lamppost. Keep in mind, that entire thing can be skipped, including Old Yarnum, if you just use the Chief Hunter emblem on this gate. It's also at this time I decide to revisit the clinic, although admittedly I did forget to do this earlier. If you did this right after you had visited the Hunter's Dream for the first time, you would get a Yosefka's blood vial, which is another special blood vial like Adela's, except this one just heals you more flat out. Anyhow, stopping by here, Yosefka no longer gives out free blood vials, but she does instead ask us to send some people her way if they're in need of a safe place to go. So now we have two different safe havens to send people to. Sweet. With this in mind, we go back to the chapel ward and exploring some of the doors around, we find a couple of people that need a place to stay. Our first stop is this lovely sounding lady of the night, and deciding to keep all my hoes in the same place in order to start my Soulsborne harem, I send her over to the Odeon Chapel with my boy. He could use a proper lady friend anyway. Across the street from her, we talk to a man who also needs a place to stay, and I don't know about you, but he sounds pretty sick to me, so I decide to send him over to the clinic. Yosefka could use the work anyway. Also, the black church set is here if you'd like it, so if you need an outfit to convince Adela to go down to the chapel and you don't want to spend insight on Father Gascoigne's outfit, here's the next best option for you. Moving on through the streets, we open this gate here as a shortcut before continuing on to the church, but before that, it's time to explore a little bit. I take a quick detour to the right over here, but other than a couple of annoying to deal with enemies and some of those beasts that drop some stone shards, there's not a lot going on here. And if you're like me, thanks to my escapades earlier, I don't particularly need those right now. But that didn't stop me from clearing out what I could regardless. Before we continue on, we go ahead and stop by the Odeon Chapel so we we can see our new hose. This here is Ariana. She's a nice lady, and much like a lot of other ladies, she is happy to give us her blood, which, on top of healing you, also increases how quickly your stamina recovers for about 20 seconds. While that sounds nifty, and it is, you want to be careful. If you have Adela in the same haven, and you take Ariana's blood 3 times, you'll come back to the poor girl dead and Adela covered in blood. I'm sure you don't need me to spell out what happened here, but an interesting thing to note is that Adela does get progressively more envious as you take Ariana's blood. Just remember, 2 is the limit if you don't want her to die, and for reasons we'll discuss later, you do not want her to die right now. Also, the old man we sent to the clinic is here. Aw, darn. He saw through us and managed to get to our little hidey hole regardless. Man, he sure showed me. That out of the way, we return to the big church just to then go down this other side path to the left because I'm one of those players that has to explore every optional area first. Descending down, we find ourselves for the first time out of the London aesthetics of Yarnum and into a forest. Here, we're fighting not so good boys and their trigger happy owners before opening this gate and getting our next lantern. As we go through the woods, handling any rude old woman we happen across, we eventually find ourselves going down into this non-conspicuous abandoned building, and uh-oh, boss fight time. But before I can deal with that, I have something I need to do. So once the boss fight is triggered, I go ahead and use a bold hunter mark and go back to the hunter's dream to pick up some milk. Here, I decide to go ahead and spend all my insight, for reasons you'll see in just a moment. Once we're all spent, we give the old ladies one more hello, before going back and starting the fight proper. This is the Witch of Hemwick, and as you might notice, the room is empty. This is why we dumped our insight, as without insight, the ads that normally spawn for this fight simply never appear, making this fight a complete joke. To kill this boss, we have to find them first, which is a bit of a pain, but looking around aimlessly, we do eventually happen upon her and easily enough give her a backstab or two. She'll then disappear somewhere else in the room, and you need to repeat the process again. As you drop the first one, you'll notice a second health bar, because, yup, there's 2 of them. Honestly, the fight is more annoying than it is challenging, especially if you decide to be dumb as a brick. You do want to kill the second witch quickly though, because if you leave her alive long enough, she does bring her sister back to life. Boss fight ended, a real nail biter that one, really came down to the wire. We move on to this abandoned room where we find a lifeless, tortured body. Among the remains, we find the rune workshop tool, something I highly recommend you pick up. With this, all those runes we've picked up throughout the game, we can now equip back in the Hunter's Dream. These are, in my opinion, a much better version of the blood gems we equip on our weapons because they actually add some variety to the game. They can increase the amount of time you have to use the rally mechanic, increase the damage your visceral attacks do, allow you to carry more blood vials, allow you to carry more quicksilver bullets, etc. There's a ton of different effects you can have, and depending on what your playstyle is, will help determine which runes you'll want to equip. You have 4 slots to play around with, 3 of which can be used for normal runes, with the last one reserved for covenants. It's a cool mechanic, and it's fairly well done, and one I always look forward to using when I replay the game, even if I tend to use the same runes. Namely the ones that give you more echoes on a kill, and allow you to hold more blood vials. By the way, there is no interesting lore I can find for the witches. They're just sort of there. It can maybe be inferred that they're the ones that tortured the person downstairs, most likely Carol, the inventor of the runes that we use, but there's not a ton to say about them in the back end. Moving on, it's time to finally stop putting off that massive church. Going back to Odeon Chapel, we make our way to the healing church. As we enter inside, we're greeted by a cutscene of a woman kneeling in prayer and clutching a gold pendant before suddenly letting out a blood-curdling scream and transforming into a gargantuan beast and turning to face us. This is Vicar Amelia, our next boss fight, and the second boss that is strictly required to finish the game. This fight is isn't anything too special. It's fairly similar to the cleric beast in many ways, which is appropriate as that's sort of what she is. The strat here is get to her side that holds the amulet to her chest, light your weapon on fire because, as a beast, she is vulnerable to it, and go to town. Considering we're going into this fight with a +6 weapon, the max you can have at this point in the game without abusing certain mechanics and or exploits, even if we got it via a glitch, it doesn't take too long. As far as the lore that surrounds Amelia, there's not a lot to go off of. Thanks to her title, it can be assumed that she was a high-ranking member of the Healing Church and, as a result, was very devout in her beliefs surrounding the blood the church doled out to its many recipients. Due to a prayer we see earlier in the previous cutscene, it can possibly be inferred that she is well aware of the fact that too much of the blood transforms people into the very beast that they hunt. Her death is also what triggers the first major change in the world of Yharnam, as her death leads to the night advancing to midnight. See, Bloodborne is split into thirds, and with Amelia slaughtered, that's the first third of the game finished, and I underestimated how long this video was going to be. Amelia is also deeply connected with the DLC for Bloodborne, because as soon as we've defeated her and returned to the Hunter's Dream, we are given the Eye of the Blood Drunk Hunter, which is the key item we need in order to enter the DLC areas, but that's for later. For now, we go and touch the skull on the altar Amelia was guarding. As we do so, we get another cutscene where we see a man named Lawrence having a discussion with someone he calls Master Willem. This takes place sometime soon after the tombs that we discussed earlier by Alfred were discovered with the old blood inside. Essentially, this can be seen as the moment where Lawrence went off to found the Healing Church, using the miraculous healing blood to establish himself within the city of Yharnam as arguably the most powerful figure. Master Willem, as the leader of Bergenworth, is no fool though, and he can certainly tell that there must be more to this blood than what the scholars have discovered of it. He does not trust the blood, and in hindsight, he's right not to. We can very clearly see the side effects of too much exposure littered throughout the streets of the city, but Lawrence, as many young men often are, is arrogant and believes his master is simply an old man that refuses to adapt to the times. As the scene ends, Master Willem tells Lawrence to fear the old blood, because if he doesn't, it will be his undoing. With that out of the way, we need to move on. Going back to the circular plaza and turning down this way, which took me an embarrassingly long time for me to remember considering I have 300 hours in the damn game. As we come to this new area, we are once again face to face with our bro, Alfred, who doesn't have anything new to say at the moment, but it is nice to see him again. Don't worry, he'll be important later. As we travel along the spiral staircase, we come to this door asking for a password, and since we touched the skull of Lawrence, we know the phrase needed, fear the old blood. Saying the phrase, the door opens, and inside, we find only a man who is already dead, and interacting with him, we gain a madman's knowledge. Nice. Further going along, we find ourselves in a complex and winding forest. Watch the bridge, by the way. I remember my first time playing and getting whacked by that. Good times. As we traverse through the woods, clearing out the many enemies that pollute the trees, we eventually happen upon a town gate with another log trap.
It is even funnier the second time.
While this section is mostly full of beasts and people that want to kill us, as is standard in this game, there is surprisingly a door that does have a genuine NPC to talk to. He seems like a nice fella as he gives us a tonsil stone and tells us to go to the right of the Healing Church as the old godheads will give us strength. So I'll absolutely make sure to do that at some point. Moving on, we go explore this cliff overlooking the newly found forest village, and other than another PETA moment, we do have one main point of interest at the moment, and that would be the white church outfit on the roof of the building here. So if you, for some reason, haven't talked to Adela yet and still need an outfit to riz her out, here's another option for you. But with that out of the way, it's time we descend into this cave here and Motherfuck. Goddamn Miyazaki and his poison swamps. Although this reminds me much more of Mercury than it does your typical green poison, the effect is the same, and I hate Miyazaki and his obsession with this stuff. It also doesn't help that this lake has the single most annoying enemy in the game. These stupid freaking tapeworms that make me want to rip my non-existent hair out of my head. In fairness, it's not the worst poison swamp Miyazaki has ever made. I don't even think calling it a swamp is very accurate. It's more like a poison puddle, and much like a puddle, it's not very big and we can quickly move past it. Climbing up, we find ourselves back in the city of Yharnam with the familiar streets and buildings, and taking a moment to get to this gate, it should be even more familiar as we now find ourselves outside the clinic. That's right, that cave we found is the path we needed to open this gate that's been taunting us since the very beginning of the game, and man, does it feel satisfying. As we continue exploring, we eventually happen upon this ladder to the rooftops, and climbing it, we're able to sneak into the back of the clinic, gaining an insight as we do, for some reason. Of course, we want to be careful about it for now. These double doors here are off limits at the moment. Why? I'll explain later. Just don't do it for now. As for the rest of the clinic, at the moment there are only two things of interest, namely this weird blue alien thing. Killing it, it drops a Yosefka blood vial, and unlike a lot of enemies, this one never respawns. Also, their body never despawns, which I find humorous. And even more interesting, we find this letter in the room where we originally received our blood transfusion at the beginning of the game. Now, why this letter wasn't here at the very beginning is beyond me, but it's here now and this will be important later. For now, we have business back in the forest. Traveling through the many surprises of the forest, including a fucking cannon, damn powder kegs, we also find these snakehead guys moving on into the forest, and I swear to God you can parry them, but that shit is just impossible for me to do for some reason. And as we explore this abandoned building, we find our very own cannon that we can use, and I don't recommend it unless you're doing a blood tinge build for some reason. Yeah, it does a lot of damage, but it also takes 5 bullets per shot to use. Still, it's fun to use, and I just love the idea of using a portable Mega Man cannon. Also, outside of the balcony of this very same building, we find a very sick man currently over a pile of dead bodies, presumably vomiting over them. And I feel for the man, I truly do. So when he asks me if there's some place he can go, I send him over to the clinic, since it seems like Yosefka does good work and this man looks like he could use the help. Always happy to help a man in need. Lastly, and I know we're blitzing through the forest bit, but in my defense, most of it is just confusing winding paths. We do manage to find a shortcut back to the original lamppost we used when we first came to the forest, but more interestingly, we have a friend here that seems very enthusiastic about exterminating vermin. This is Voltaire, and this man is special, very special indeed, as he offers us our very first covenant. Should you accept, you are now a member of the League, and as great as that is, this is essentially pointless if you're flying solo as I am. See, vermin can be obtained by placing down a summon sign with the covenant rune equipped and killing a boss while a phantom. I also doubt it's something that's very active these days, as this game is nearly a decade old, but I'm sure if you really want that exclusive gear, you can find someone to help you out on a forum or a friend who has the game. I go ahead and equip the rune anyway because, well, I got nothing else to put in the slot, so I may as well. But yeah, for now, that's all I want to do in the forest. So, what do you say we handle those summons? Going back to Hemwick Lane, we traveled to that open field we stopped by earlier when we were making our way to the witches, and it can be easy to miss, but there is a big pillar overgrown with vines. Going there, we'll be given a cutscene where a carriage is summoned to our location. It took me a while to figure out that there wasn't an automatic cutscene of our character climbing onto the carriage, and turns out you gotta climb in it yourself. Whoops. Climbing into the carriage, we're dropped off at one of the most unique areas in all of Bloodborne, Canehurst Castle. Well, unique to Bloodborne anyway, as this is the only area in the game that has snow, and it is entirely separate from Yharnam. Traveling through the castle grounds, the very first thing you're going to notice are the new liquor enemies. These enemies give me the heebie-jeebies, and I am happy to rid the world of these disgusting, vile creatures. Also, worms. Again, for some reason. Why? Well, inside the castle proper, we're greeted by many indentured servants, I assume, and ghosts filling the halls. They're nothing difficult to handle, but I do really like the aesthetics inside. It feels dark, cold, and isolated, with enemies entirely unique to the castle, and it is an area most first-time players aren't going to find, and understandably so. It is pretty damn easy to miss. As we climb through the castle, handling gargoyles on the roof and slaves in the castle walls.
Parry this, you filthy casual.
Also, there's a few garbs here of interest. This fancy dress number, which you might notice looks absolutely amazing on me. But other than that, you might also notice that it's a very similar dress to what Ariana wears. In fact, they're identical. This, paired with the fact the description of her blood saying that the blood is similar to the blood that was forbidden, implies that Ariana was once, or perhaps still is, a member of the Vile Bloods, or at the very least, a resident of Canehurst Castle. We can also find ourselves an executioner set. This, for some reason, can also be used to calm down Adela and Yarhar Ghul, so if you just want to be different, you can use this set. And lastly, we find a Canehurst Knight set here. It looks fine, but that hat, yeah, now we're swagged out. As we travel through the many hallways and rooftops of the castle, eventually we happen to see a throne in the distance. As we approach, this bag of bones creaks and stands to face us. This is Martyr Ligarius. And if that name sounds familiar, don't worry, you're not going crazy, because it should. This is the often talked about mentor Alfred brings up, the man he admires above anyone else. Well, despite our bro's respect for the man, sadly, we do need to put him to an end. This fight can be annoying, as Ligarius can do things like shoot spells and explode, but a few well-timed parries and taking advantage of his staggers in phase 1, and he's not too bad. As we finish him off, nothing seems to happen, but he does drop his crown and, well, like the king I am, I decide to place it on my head, and doing so, we're given a cutscene where we see the only illusionary wall in the game melt away, leading to the Canehurst throne room, and inside, we meet the queen of Canehurst Castle and the Vile Bloods on a lease. You might be asking, why didn't Ligarius kill the queen, the sworn enemy of the executioners of the church, when he had her trapped alone in her own castle? Well, that's the thing, my dear viewer. He did. He killed her numerous times, dozens of times, but no matter what he did, be it cutting her into pieces, pounding her to a pulp, burning her, freezing her, or any other method of execution, she would not die. Master Ligarius realized something horrifying. The corrupted blood had made the queen truly immortal, and there was nothing that could keep her dead. So he did the only thing he could think to do. He sealed her and her corrupted blood away in an area where nobody could get to her, and sacrificed himself to be a guardian to keep anyone who did find this tucked away throne room away. Moving into the throne room, we talk to Queen Annalise, and kneeling down, swear loyalty to her and join the Vile Blood Covenant. This covenant is basically just the PvP covenant, so the opposite of the Legion, but unlike the Legion, we can also use this against NPCs. So if we kill another player or NPC, we are given blood dregs. Giving these to the queen, we're given 2 emotes total, and that's it. You get nothing else. It is the most pointless covenant in the franchise, and that's saying something. But hey, if you want to simp for your queen, then who am I to stop you? Because Lord knows I never bothered changing to another covenant in this playthrough. But more importantly, we do find an unopened summons to Canehurst Castle at a nearby table. So you might remember Alfred was looking for a way to get to Canehurst Castle so he could slay the evil Vilebloods, and well, since these summons aren't addressed to anyone specifically, methinks he might have some use for these later. We have other things to do at the moment. Going back into the Forbidden Forest, we find ourselves climbing down into a new section, a much more open and confusing to explore section of the forest. The first thing to collect is this interestingly designed grave guard set. It's a bit difficult to find, but just follow the road till this point and diverge to this jump. The second thing to note is that there are a ton of Carol runes throughout the forest. So many, in fact, I'm not going to show you where they all are because I got tired of writing them down and we're so far in. No, just know there's more here than anywhere else in the game. My guess for why that is because we're right outside of Bergenworth, an institution whose leader was staunchly against the blood and wanted a separate way to understand and use the powers of the old gods, something that the runes are much closer to than the blood, depending on who you ask. Anyhow, moving on, we descend down into the forest until meet the Shadows of Yarnum. They're not Ornstein and Smo, but they can still be rather annoying, namely with their stupid snake attacks and tendency to chain off each other's attacks. But if you're patient and take out one at a time, they go down quickly enough. Also parry, just parry them, that always works. As for lore, to tell you the truth, there's not a ton to tell. Best I can tell you is that they're here looking for something, as they're atypical to the usual denizens of the forest, barring the weird snakes that sprout from their hoods, of course. Once we move past the Pillarmen, we find ourselves finally on the grounds of Bergenworth, overlooking a beautiful lake, which perfectly contrasts these hideous fly creatures surrounding the grounds. Believe it or not, there is some lore that you can tie to these weird, grotesque creatures. Namely, you might notice that, much like many insects, these have a crap ton of eyes, something Willem, master of Bergenworth, if you remember, was talking about with his apprentice Lawrence, that their eyes have yet to open. Could this be implying that Willem was attempting to give his students more eyes in an attempt to better understand the old gods? Like most Soulsborne lore, it's impossible to give a definitive answer, but later on in the college itself, we can find Master Willem, and if you kill him, he does drop the eye rune. So I think the chances are high that in his obsession with eyes, the old master was willing to do something in an attempt to gain more in hopes that it would lead to a better understanding of the Great Ones. Out on the balcony, before killing him in cold blood, Master Willem grunts and points at the lake, clearly hoping to point our attention to it. So, with nothing to lose, once Willem is sent to the nursery home, we dive into the lake for a quick swim. But oh no, looks like the pool is infected with spiders. So this is Rom, the vacuous spider. The arena is super cool. It's just a shame the boss itself isn't exactly good. It's an ad boss, and it's one of the worst ones at that. The spiderlings Rom summons, births? Well, whatever you want to call it, they're annoying because their heads are armored, meaning you have to hit them from the side, and if they hit you, there's a very real chance that you will be stun locked to death. I encourage you to clear the babies before killing Mom, as tedious as that is. The worst part though, once you've gotten Rom low, she'll just teleport away, summoning more babies, and now, this time, you have to dodge the meteors she summons while you slaughter her children. Wow, FromSoft, what an amazingly designed boss. Well, Rom slain, after what feels like an eternity, we're greeted by a woman in a white dress staring at the moon. As we approach her, we turn and see the moon is now this massive red entity, almost engulfing the entire sky, and as it seemingly gets closer, we can hear a baby in the background crying. So, a few things here, and since this is Bloodborne lore, keep in mind it will be mostly speculation and my own personal interpretations. This woman we see here, this is Queen Yharnam, for whom the city is named after. But, by her blood-stained dress and the handcuffs on her, there are many implications that can be made. Let's talk about some of the more obvious ones. Pregnancy. Throughout the game, especially now with the moon hanging low and blood red, we meet many women who either become pregnant or wish to become pregnant, specifically with a child of blood. This, in my interpretation, is essentially the child of one of the Great Ones because, according to the umbilical cord we collected, the Great Ones are incapable of having their own children, yet they yearn for it, so they look for surrogates. Queen Yharnam is, to my knowledge, the only person to have ever successfully conceived and birthed one of these children, but by the handcuffs we can see on her, it can possibly be implied that this was a child pushed onto her against her own will, or at the very least, it was taken away from her against her will. Which one is it? It's hard to say, but if you manage to get to her secret boss fight, which I'll explain in just a moment, we can actually find a pregnant Yharnam fighting feverishly, almost like an animal in a cage. This could be implying her desperate struggle to break out, to get away from this child she never wanted, or it could be interpreted as her struggling to keep the child away from those that would take it away from her. It's impossible to say because, again, Dark Souls lore can be very rarely, if ever, straightforward. As for why we see this now, well, it turns out if you read some of the notes found in the college, the moon has been like this for a long time, and Rom was essentially doing a much bigger version of what Martyr Ligarius did, and just casting a massive illusion to prevent people from finding out the truth. Of course, Rom now dead, there is no hiding the moon, or any of the other creatures that now call Yharnam their home. And yes, these are the same creatures that would be revealed to you should you have the appropriate amount of insight. Basically meaning, if you're too smart, then Rom can't trick you. Which is honestly kind of funny when you consider that in the original Japanese version of the game, Rom's name can be more accurately translated to idiotic, or even R-slur spider. I can understand why localizers didn't go for the latter option, but I have no idea why they chose vacuous over idiotic, especially since when I first played the game, the word vacuous went entirely over my head. Maybe I'm the vacuous one. Moving on, let's talk about that Yharnam boss fight, or rather, how you unlock it, because I have something to admit. I did not do the boss for this playthrough, as shameful as that is. I know. I didn't show you guys all the content the game has to offer, but in my defense, unlocking this boss fight is just so tedious that, let me explain. So, remember that chalice we unlocked when we killed the blood-starved beast? Yeah? Well, take it to these gravestones in the Hunter's Dream, and we can create a chalice dungeon. I fucking hate chalice dungeons. They are nothing but randomized floors filled with mobs, a lever to unlock the boss, maybe some treasure, then rinse and repeat 3 times. Do that over and over and over again, and eventually you'll get to Queen Yharnam. It's not a fun time. If you've watched my Persona 3 video, you know I think randomized dungeons are nothing but a boring slog of nothing, and these ain't much better than Tartarus. On the other hand, these things are the dopest shit in the series. Don't get me wrong, the gameplay loop sucks and it is super tedious, and the dungeons are only really worth it if you're after certain gear or want the best way to grind blood vials or gemstones or what have you. No. What makes these dungeons super cool is that hackers have actually found cut content, and by using special codes they've put online, you can actually experience some of this cut content for yourself. It doesn't have a lot of practical purpose, but the fact that people found a way to put this stuff in the game is honestly one of the coolest parts of Bloodborne. Highly recommend looking into it. It's cool stuff. Moving on from Chalice dungeons, let's go deal with that tonsil stone given to us by that nice stranger, why don't we? So remember that one dead end to the right of the church we saw earlier? Yeah, well, it's not a dead end anymore, but we're not worried about that right now. Instead, we're looking for this giant dish right in front of the doors here so we can get grabbed by one of these boys. As we get grabbed, we find ourselves in a brand new area. Back in school, we find ourselves in...
Welcome to the Come Zone.
Okay, yeah, other than that, there's not much to say about this place, so let's get out of here. I'm tired of looking like the casting couch. This area, much to my chagrin, is another goddamn poison swamp. Miyazaki, what the fuck? Other than the awful, terrible gimmick of another poison swamp in another Souls game, Miyazaki really can't help himself. There's not a ton to say here. Well, at the very least, there is some treasure to collect here, so it's not all bad. I fucking hate this place. Well, traveling through the vast poison swamp of Miyazaki's wet dreams, we eventually get to this massive open area with one of these creatures we see all around Yharnam. These are known as amygdalas. Amygdalae? Well, whatever you want to call it, it is a great one. Or as I've been calling it, one of the old gods. This, along with Rom, are some of the first great ones we are capable of fighting. And to tell you the truth, knowing that, I don't see what's so great about either of them. Rom was annoying, and this guy is piss easy. The hardest part about him is that his vulnerable points are hard to get to because they're in the air, but he is a cool designed boss. And that moment where he rips off his own arm to beat you with it, that's hardcore. That boss cleared, we gain a new chalice we can use to make more dungeons. That's going right into the bin. And that's it. Yeah, unless you're wanting to explore all the chalice dungeons, I wouldn't bother coming here. There's nothing but misery. Also, at this point, if you stop by Odeon Chapel and talk to the old lady here, she gives us that good. And believe you me, we're going to want to stock up on those. It was at this point I figured out I messed up the Eileen questline, or at least dealt with the consequences of it. Stopping by the Vicar Amelia boss fight arena, we fight a crazed Eileen now determined to kill all hunters, rather than just the ones that have gone mad themselves. Killing her, with a sad feeling in my gut, we pick up her badge so we can now purchase her armor and weapons, if we so choose. So, I'll go over this side quest a bit, most likely using someone else's footage because I do not have time to replay the entire game to show it off. Essentially, after you open up all the gates in the circular plaza, and before you fight Vicar Amelia, you're supposed to go down to Odeon Chapel and back to the arena where you fought Father Gascoigne. There, you'll see Eileen fighting another hunter. This hunter, fun fact, is Henrique, the old partner of Gascoigne. Something to note about his description from his clothing is that he lived a tragically long life. How one lives a life long enough for it to be tragic, who can say, but it's clear that it wasn't good on his mind, most likely driven entirely mad. Eileen here will thank us for helping her, but warns us that we should leave the hunting of hunters to her and we should focus on Beast. From there, we play the game as normal until after we've killed Rom, at which point we can go back to the Vicar Amelia boss fight where we see Eileen injured in over her head. She tells us to back off since since this is her hunt, but as I hope is obvious, she cannot handle this fight herself. So you go in there and you handle it for her. Fun fact, this fight is extremely personal to Eileen, most likely why she doesn't want you to interfere. It's thought that he is either Eileen's former partner in being a hunter of hunters, her student who turned on her to join Canehurst, or he murdered her previous partner slash student and took their clothing for himself. Anyway it goes, I think it's clear that there is a personal vendetta going on here. Once killed, you can talk to Eileen once again, who thanks you and admit that she's gotten too old for this line of work, and since we've been so apt at it anyway, decides that we should take the mantle of Hunter of Hunters for her, giving us the Covenant rune and the badge that allows us to buy her gear and weapon. Anyhow, at this point, I decide it's time to go meet up with our old buddy Alfred and check in on him. Giving him the unopened summons, he seems incredibly ecstatic to be able to finish his master's work. Summons delivered, we go ahead and stop by our queen again, where we find Alfred very proud of his work. The queen is nothing but a bloody pulp on her chair, with Alfred basking in his glory. Talking to him, he thanks us once again, saying now Logarius can go down as a true martyr. Before leaving, we pick up the queenly flesh from the throne and make our way back to Odeon Chapel, and then to the temple over Old Yarnum where we originally met Alfred. As we arrive at the spot where we first met, we find Alfred on the ground dead, with the Radiance rune on his body. It's theorized that Alfred, in an attempt to become a true martyr like his master, took his own life, and in an ironic twist, much like his master, the loss of his life was entirely in vain, seeing as how the Queen of Canehurst will always come back thanks to the forbidden blood. It is only a matter of time. With the rune Alfred dropped, you can join the Executioners faction, which is a mostly online thing, so we're not going to bother with it. Moving back through the massive double doors and not getting grabbed by our huge amygdala friend, we find ourselves back in Yarhar Ghul. You remember, the one place where we got kidnapped, and one thing to note as you step in, far in the distance, we can hear a baby crying. Creepy. Anyhow, moving on through this section, once you get to the part with all these old ladies throwing Molotovs and stabbing you with branding irons, we make sure to jump off the side with the missing railing here, as doing so, we can grab ourselves the Upper Cathedral key. And what a fascinating key it is, because immediately after getting ping-ponged by a bunch of rude old women, I decide, fuck this place, and go and open a brand new area. So back in Odeon Chapel, riding the elevator up and climbing the ladder to the door we could not open way back when, with our brand new fancy Upper Cathedral key, we can now find ourselves in Upper Cathedral Ward. And just from an aesthetics perspective, this is probably one of my favorite areas in the entire game. I love being among the twisted treetops, the heavy fog surrounding the area, and the way everything feels abandoned by normal people. You only see these church servants walking around the grounds, or these horrifying babies crawling around. Making our way inside, we're greeted by the darkest area in the damn game, and if I didn't have nerves of steel from my years as a hardened gamer, I might be a little spooked at the sight of it, but luckily for you guys, I'm able to push through this easily. Moving through the church, fighting werewolves and brain suckers, we eventually happen to find an orphanage key on one of them. We open these massive doors where we're met with a very interesting sight. I'm not sure how to describe this, but I like it. As we climb the stairs of the orphanage, we find ourselves in a room full of flowers and a window in the back, but sadly, we can't admire the scenery, as this is indeed a boss room. One that I forgot was in the game, to be honest. So it's actually a bit of a surprise for me. Fighting the boss, I figure out why I forgot it, because this is just the ROM we have at home. It's another ad fight. You know the drill. Kill the ads to make the way to the big one. Kill the big one, and then they all die. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. What I find more fascinating are the implications around this boss fight. Remember, we needed an orphanage key in order to get to this room, as the the existence of this boss implying that the church would take orphans and transform them into these strange alien creatures? That would be my guess, and it makes the healing church and their practices even more vile. And what makes it even more gut-wrenching, in my opinion, is that these experiments are seemingly still being done. If not here, then at the very least, it's being done at the clinic where we started the game. Boss done, we go to the window and we break it. What? We've never been able to break any window in any Souls game ever. And now we can just smash this window here out of nowhere? And not even just that. There's not even a hint that this is possible. Like, I would not blame anyone for missing this. This is so dumb. What makes it worse is this is never done again throughout the entire game. Except for one in the DLC. Like, how could they expect you to know you could smash the window? You literally couldn't break any other window in the game, or even in the entire franchise. This is a dumb secret from Soft. This is not well done. Why did you do this? Tangent aside, we move on to the elevator heading down, where we're met with a most fascinating sight. In a massive room, we see a creature unlike any we've seen before, looking longingly at something. I'll explain in a bit. For now, we need to deal with this thing, whatever it is. So we pull out our weapon and go to town, and I highly recommend you don't do what I did here and pop your consumables before the health bar appears, because until it does, you actually do 0 damage. This is Abrides, daughter of the Cosmos, or as I like to call her, the one left behind. For the boss fight itself, it's pretty fun. I enjoy it. My only real complaint is that she has a charge attack that is pretty difficult to dodge, and if you don't dodge it, you're almost guaranteed to die. But other than that, I think she's a fun challenge. Not the best fight in the game by any means. She's a basic big girl where you dodge and hit, and she also gets a dumb poison aura around her in the later half of the fight, which, fun fact, also poisons her. She just has an incredibly high resistance to it. But if you're so inclined to wait it out, you actually could just wait for her to poison and kill herself. As the fight comes to an end, with a draw of all things, funnily enough, I want to discuss the lore for a bit here, because this is a great one that was left behind by others of her kind. Why did they leave her behind? Who can say? But I think it's very interesting that she doesn't attack the player at first. She shows no hostility towards us. We have to attack her first. Maybe she was working with the choir to contact those that left her in an attempt to reunite with the other great ones. And what makes this more tragic to me is that by looking at the altar she was staring at when we arrived, we can see the corpse of Rom, or at least a being like Rom, who we know is another great one. Maybe Abrides felt a kinship with Rom and is grieving the loss of another of her kind, or maybe she's trying to bring her back to no avail, as at this altar, if you have the queenly flesh with you, you can actually use that here in order to bring the vile blood matriarch back from the dead. Why does the altar have this sort of power? I don't know, but it is interesting. That side mission out of the way, we go back to Yarhar Ghul, dodging massive lasers on our way back to the very familiar area. Sadly, the lantern that was here was torn away. By who? No idea, but these gents down here might know. Unfortunately, they don't know where the lantern is, so we're going to have to continue on without it. Moving back through Yarhar Ghul, we can finally ride the elevator taking us to this section above the city. There's goodies up here and a teleport thingy, which helps you move past the things on the street, which are mildly annoying. There's actually not a ton to say about the city. There's a lot to explore, but not a lot to gain other than some bloodstone chunks. So eventually we make our way to this massive open arena, and would you believe me if I said there was a boss fight? This massive wriggling mass of bones and flesh falls from a hole in the sky. It's an unsettling sight, but luckily we won't be looking at it for too long. As the fight starts, we immediately ignore ignore the massive thing and run up the stairs because, as you might have noticed from the cutscene, there was a woman in red robes with a bell that summoned this creature, and she'll probably be an issue, so we need to deal with her. Unfortunately, the cutscene didn't show us that there were several of these women, so before we can actually fight the boss, we need to clear out all his bitches. And yes, in case you were wondering, if you die, they all respawn, so you have to do it again. Women killed, we move on to the boss, and it is an unsettling sight as he flails around wildly, covering the arena around him in his, a goop. And later in the fight, summoning some of his disgusting flesh puddles over our heads. He's not too difficult of a boss, just be careful not to get stuck on his legs. As for lore, there's really nothing said in game about the creature, but it can possibly be inferred from the rest of the game and its obsession with ascension. My guess would be that this was a result of some twisted experiment or misguided ritual to ascend that went horribly wrong. What that ritual entailed, or who was at the head of it, who knows, but it's the best theory I've heard. Moving on from that mass, I decided to take another detour because I apparently have a terrible time sticking to a task at hand, and decided we should check up on Yosefka and her patients. As we go to the clinic, having to go through the gate because even though we can easily smash windows now, a door is far above our capabilities. As we step into the clinic, we can find ourselves another alien guy full of water in his brain, and remember that sick guy we saw way back in the forest and sent here? Yeah, this is him as can be told by the beast rune he drops on death. If you're wondering, yes, this is what happens to any NPC you send to the clinic. Sending the bandaged man here makes him far easier to kill than if we attacked him outright, and it's something I recommend you do, because if you send him to the other safe haven, he will one by one pick off all the other survivors. So send him here and he's not an issue. Anyhow, it's also heavily implied that the real Yosefka was that other alien, or kin as they're known, that we killed and gained her blood vial from. The real Yosefka was a kind woman who genuinely wanted to help people, but much like any other Souls game, no good deed goes unpunished. Moving on, we enter the forbidden room and climb the stairs. We could finally meet Yosefka face to face for the first time, who is showing very clear signs of pregnancy, complaining about nausea and other such nonsense. Also, for the feet lovers out there, yes, this is the part of the game that is contractually obligated to be part of every Souls game to contain a barefooted woman. No, don't ask me why Miyazaki puts this in all his games. I don't know either. Anyhow, hoping to ease her burden, we give the nurse a slight pat on the back, and for our efforts, we're rewarded with another third of the umbilical cord, making 2. With that out of the way, going back to the reborn boss fight and touching the guy here, we find ourselves in a nightmare plane, and this is probably even worse than the goddamn poison swamp if you can believe it. Namely because if you step out from behind a wall, this frenzy meter goes up, and if that hits max, you lose around 75% of your max hit points, so you know, watch out for that. Luckily, Granny back in Odeon Chapel gave us that good, those sedatives, and that can instantly clear the frenzy buildup. On the upside though, the frenzy has friendly fire, so if you can, try to use that to your advantage. Also, it should be noted that Frenzy builds up quicker if you have Insight, so you want to drop your Insight before you come to this area to make things a little bit easier on yourself. Moving through the area quickly, past some giants tossing boulders, we open the gates to this building to find ourselves with a ridiculous amount of spiders. My advice, use either bullets or throwing knives and lure each baby spider down one at a time, then dealing with mom when they're all exterminated. It's a tedious process, but it's better than facing an entire army all at once. Moving on from that, and past the hunter on the bridge, who also uses Ludwig's pulley blade, fun fact. In this new room, we can go down this elevator here, unlocking a new lantern, but more importantly, we, as the 6 6-foot tall Giga Chads can show these 5'11" manlets what it's like to be able to reach the top shelf, and their brains totally unable to process this, they just slump over and die. As we continue on through the domain of the Pocket Princes, we take an elevator up and you know what? I think it's a good time to delve into the DLC, you guys. You guys want to do the DLC? I want to do the DLC. Let's go do the DLC. Yeah, let's do that. You might be asking, how do we start the DLC? There's no option for it in the menus. Well, you, my friend, have never played a Souls game. Every Souls game DLC works like this. It's not enough to just have the DLC. You then need to find the special DLC item, then have to go to a specific area and perform some esoteric action to do the DLC with maybe some item descriptions that might give us a hint on how to do it. In this case, the first thing we need is the Eye of the Blood-Drunk Hunter, which is easy enough. You get that automatically as a result of killing Vicar Amelia. As for the esoteric action we need to perform, well, it turns out we've done it before. Any ideas? No, that's wrong. What are you, stupid? No, we need to go to the amygdala outside Odeon Chapel and have him teleport us there, obviously. As we get teleported to our new area, we'll find that the area is rather familiar. In fact, it seems to be a future wasted version of the chapel we were just at, and even more interesting, it's the only part of the game that takes place during the day. While there are the classic beast we're accustomed to, we'll also find some hunters going around hunting said beast who, if you're paying attention, seem to be deathly afraid of not only them, but us as well. Moving past the hunters and to the healing church, we'll see these things open the door, also mowing down beast, but more importantly, inside the church itself, we can see what appears to be another cleric beast, already dead, and in his hands, he's holding an eye pendant. Taking that, we move on past the mini machine guns on the streets, absolutely covered in blood and appropriately infested with these lickers. Going down the left side of the street, or right, depending on your orientation, we find ourselves in a cave where... That was a nuisance. Anyhow, moving on. What the fuck is happening in this cave? Well, clear all that out somehow, get the loot, and we can continue on through this place. As we continue on, killing some beast and clearing out a few annoyances, we can go back to the church lamppost via these stairs, but on the way we can meet a friend. This is Simon, and he's an interesting man. Namely, he's a hunter here that hasn't gone absolutely insane with bloodlust, which, as explained by him, that is how all other hunters ended up here. He tells us to turn back and leave while we still can, but if we tell him we have an interest in nightmares and secrets, he'll let us stay, but warns us to be careful before sending us off on our way. Moving on through the areas, clearing big boys with big guns, killing old hunters, and getting loot here and there, we eventually come to a massive open area, and, well, we've done this before, so let's cut to the boss fight. The opening here is haunting. We have men on the ground covered in blood begging for help against a terrible beast named Ludwig, and a terrible beast he is, good god. I love the design. A head and a half head twisted horse with a horrifying shrieking voice. This is Ludwig the Accursed, the first boss of the DLC, and boy howdy is he a doozy. He attacks wildly and frantically, hits like a truck, and for some reason has a beam of,
Welcome to the...
But in my opinion, the worst part of this section is where he'll jump on the roof, and you just have to guess when he'll jump down on top of you. As we drop him to half HP, Ludwig seems to gather his wits and grabs everyone's favorite Moonlight Greatsword, and we begin Phase 2. This phase is, in my opinion, easier than the first. He's not nearly as wild or aggressive, but his attacks do have range now. Still, from a design perspective, it's a really cool looking boss, and the OST goes freaking wild, bro. It's good. It's good stuff. Boss fight done, we can actually talk to the decapitated head of Ludwig himself, where he tells us about a fleeting light, something he chased after, but never truly wanted to know what it was. But fun fact, if you change to church attire, so the same list that would help you convince Adela to come to Odeon Chapel, he actually has different dialogue. Unfortunately, I did not know this, so I just killed him and took the Holy Moonlight Sword for myself. Now, whoopsies, my bad. But as for lore for Ludwig, there's actually quite a bit here, and I'll try to trim it down because this video is long enough. Ludwig was one of the first hunters of the church. While I don't believe he founded the hunters, he was tasked with training them, and he hoped to train them to be, as he puts it, honorable Spartans. He was, of course, respected by many as a dignified man. Even Simon says that Ludwig died with his ideals intact and a true hero. It is also because of Ludwig's constant slaughters that has caused the rivers of blood to fill the streets. As we can see, the pool of blood is deepest here in this building. A blood-drunk beast he may have been, but he was a true hunter in the end. Speaking of Simon, he's here now, and other than telling us about the tragedies of Ludwig, he also gives us some information about the nightmare we're in, namely that it sprung to life thanks to the hunters and their actions, that it was their mistakes that caused this place to exist, a place where they're in a never-ending hunt, killing beast well past the point where they've gone mad. Moving up the stairs and past the jail that we can't do anything with at the moment other than talk to a man who asks us if we can hear a bell, but doesn't believe us when we say yes, we move further up the stairs where we could find ourselves in an altar room that has beds for some reason. No idea what that's about, but dealing with the annoying pair of hunters inside, we can make our way to the altar, and using the eye pendant we got earlier, we can use it as an elevator going up into the research hall. But you know better, don't you? This is a Dark Souls game, baby. Of course the elevator has a secret or two. So we ride that bitch right back down, hop off, and send her back up, and wouldn't you know it, there's another altar. On this altar, we can grab the skull of Lawrence, which should sound familiar to you. That's right, this belonged to the man that founded the Healing Church, the one we heard in the cutscene with Master Willem. This will be important in just a second, but for now, we're going to ride the second altar down and grab the church cannon just sitting here. You know, it's a real shame that melee weapons have to go on the left 2 slots in the game because, to be honest, I'd love to dual wield cannons. Anyhow, moving on, I think Lawrence would like to have his skull back, and believe it or not, we've already seen him. Remembering that smoldering, burning cleric beast we saw back in the church? Yeah, well, that was our old boy, Lawrence. You'd be able to figure this out if you sit down and think for a minute. Remember when we killed Amelia? How we gained Lawrence's memories? It was by touching his skull in the Healing Church. It's subtle, but it's a cool touch. Taking the skull back to Lawrence, he immediately thanks us by rising out of his sleep, screaming, and then going to attack us. Lawrence, the first Vicar, is the only optional boss of the DLC, and as you might guess, the fight is initially just the cleric beast, but with some added fire. Don't worry though, once we drop him to around a 70% health, he gains new moves and becomes much more aggressive than the original cleric beast, swinging wildly and frantically with fire constantly spewing out of every attack. Eventually, as we drop him to around 40% or so health, we start his final phase where he loses his legs. You'd think this make him easier, but no. The man makes it hard to get near him thanks to the constant lava pool on the back end and this fire spitting from the front. It's a wild fight, and to be honest, it's the fight that had the second most amount of deaths for me in my entire playthrough. I don't even know why. Just like Paul, the fight's not hard, but I think I was getting frustrated. While I think the boss is cool, it has BS. Namely, it has what I like to call the Ornstein and Smo problem. In Dark Souls 1, there is an infamous boss fight called Ornstein and Smough, and while I think the fight itself is good and a great challenge, the thing that stops me from enjoying that fight is the fact that it has 3 bonfires nearby, and all of them are terrible. No matter which one you go to, you're going to have a long journey back to the boss, and worse than that, there are going to be several enemies between you and the boss. This leads to the problem where an already difficult fight is made even more difficult because now you can't just hop in and try again. No sir. Now you have to hope you don't screw yourself over too hard before you get there. Yeah, that's the same problem this fight has. The lantern to get back to Lawrence is a good distance away, and between him and that lantern, you have several of these beasts here, but they're not really the issue. No, the problem is you have this boulder trap you have to spring every time you come back here, and then there's these 2 big fuckers that block the church entrance who are immediately fighting as the doors swing open, so you can't even run past them. I am a proponent that the challenge of a boss fight should be the boss fight itself, not whether or not you were screwed over too hard before you even got there. I know people shit on Dark Souls 3 for having way too many bonfires, and yeah, admittedly it does, but I'd rather have that problem over having this issue. Once Lawrence is dead, we find ourselves the owner of a fancy new Beast Embrace rune. This rune is actually rather unique, not just because it's a Covenant rune, but it's a rune that actually transforms our character. Equipping the rune, we become what is known in the fanbase as the Ghastly Beast, which looks pretty sick. I like it. Though I didn't bother with it myself, it also pairs up with a specific weapon which I, again, didn't bother to get because it can only be gotten via the Chalice dungeons, and you already know how I feel about those. But if you do manage to get your hands on a pair of Beast Claws, you can go Travis Scott sicko mode, and it's honestly pretty cool looking. As for the lore behind Lawrence, well, you already know most of it. He was the man who founded the Healing Church. He's the reason why everything is happening the way that it is, why beasts roam the streets, why people get slaughtered every night, and why everything is going to hell. In a way, him burning for all of eternity in a nightmare for his arrogance and his atrocities is fitting. I also think it's interesting that he, of all people, drops a rune that transforms you into a beast. It's something he wanted. Maybe it was a misguided attempt to ascend or a bid for more strength. Who can say? But I think it's interesting nonetheless. Moving on from that, we take the elevator back to the research hall and begin exploring in there. The first thing you'll notice is this man who's lost his eyes and is digging around in this pool looking for them. And in case you were worried, yes, this pool is more poison. This area is long and confusing to explain, so please excuse me as I go over it quickly for the sake of speeding things along. Moving through the various stairs, elevators, and one-way doors, we come across this woman with a head. It sort of looks like a pimple. I like it. It's very weird looking, hence why I copped the look. Anyhow, looking to her, she says she needs more brain fluid, and the way we're going to get it is by finding these solo brain pimple things and popping them. Don't worry, they get better almost immediately. Once we've gotten 2 of them and given them to our friend here, which she will only accept after she's given us some of her special blood, which you can't take unless you don't have Adela or Ariana's in your inventory. Now, here's the thing. You need 3 brain fluids to finish her questline, and no matter where you look in this research hall, you will not find a 3rd brain to extract fluid from. What gives? Well, first things first, we're going to need to reload the area. Upon doing so, you'll find our friend is no longer her human-bodied self. She is now a massive pimple, and much like all massive pimples, I go to pop it. Again, don't worry, she's fine, and luckily, she does indeed drop the final brain fluid we need, and bonus, doesn't seem to care that we got it by killing her. Giving her this last fluid, she dies for real and drops the milkweed rune, and just like the Beast Embrace rune, this rune transforms you into a thing. Again, I didn't bother, but also like the Beast Embrace, it does pair well with a specific weapon, but we can't get that weapon right now, so let's not talk too much about it. Moving on from that side quest, and after moving the stairs, we can open these massive double doors here, and we can start our next boss fight. It's me as a boss fight. Haha, see guys, I did the joke. The one that literally everyone tells for this fight. Please, laugh, like, comment, subscribe. I'm so funny and original. Moving on from my hilarious joke, this fight is technically an ad fight, but unlike Rom, I actually enjoy this fight. It's not just a massive endless horde of guys. There will always be about 3 to 4 of these guys on the field, but I enjoy their moveset. They don't feel annoying, and the awe of when they start summoning meteors it's pretty cool. But other than that, they're not difficult. They're just an appetizer for what comes next. Before that though, let's talk about the lore a bit. Their lore isn't much different from the Celestial Emissary we found earlier. They're basically just failed versions of that. My guess as to why these guys failed where the Celestial Emissary succeeded, most likely because they were adults and as a result lost the potential to communicate with the cosmos that children are naturally born with. Once we're done with this boss fight, we enter the Astral Clock Tower. Inside, the room seems empty, save for a single person sitting perfectly still on a chair towards the back of the room. As we approach and try to touch them, maybe looking for a pulse to see if they're alive, suddenly they reach up and grab our arm, telling us that a corpse should be left well alone, and starts fighting us in an attempt to stop us from delving further into the nightmare to learn its secrets. As for the fight itself, this is often considered people's favorite boss in the game. Her moveset is unique, she's agile, she has a great design, and more than anything, she's fairly challenging. Typically. Unfortunately, like a lot of women, she's weak to a good fisting. I feel bad because I feel like I cheesed this boss, and it's a boss that deserves to be appreciated, but like, it was just so easy to do, I couldn't help myself. I'm sorry, I do like this boss. I really do. It's a really cool fight. In the second phase especially, where she stabs herself and now starts swinging her sword wildly with blood and fire, is so cool visually. I love it. It's a great fight, and I can see why it's so loved, because I love it too. But to tell you the truth, it's not my favorite in the game. It's not even my favorite in the DLC, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Maria's lore itself is rather interesting, as we can deduce from her clothing set that can be purchased from the Insight store back in the Hunter's Dream, she was originally from Canehurst, and even a distant relative of the Vile Blood Queen herself. Despite this, she actually preferred a weapon that didn't rely on blood, as stated by the Rakuyo we can find later on. Yet, despite this, in the fight, it seems she had abandoned this ideal and begun using blood as she saw fit. It's unclear what caused this change of heart, but it seems Maria feels guilt for whatever caused this nightmare to spawn, and as a result, abandoned her ideals. You may have also noticed that the doll in the Hunter's Dream bears a striking resemblance to our dear Lady Maria, and this is, well, it's kind of creepy, because apparently Gurman, despite being her mentor that she looked up to, was pretty obsessed with her, enough so he made a life-sized doll of her. I doubt Maria is aware of the doll. From what I can tell, it seems Gurman made the doll after Maria became trapped in the Hunter's nightmare and was assumed dead, but it's still creepy as hell, bro, come on. Speaking of the doll, as we go back to the Hunter's Dream and talk to her to level up, the doll tells us something inside of her has changed, a feeling similar to heavy shackles being lifted off her. That out of the way, we take the dial that Maria dropped on her death and we Indiana Jones this tower, causing the clockwork gears to open up, revealing a small, twisted, and disgusting fishing hamlet. Whatever caused this nightmare to spawn, it's surely from here. The people that once lived here are different, but they're not like the beast we're accustomed to in Yharnam. They're much more fish-like in nature, and in my opinion, I'm not even sure they're beast, but I don't think they're kin either. To tell you the truth, I'm not sure what I would label them, but they're certainly memorable. As we travel through the village, saying hello to the current inhabitants, we eventually make our way to this well in the middle of town and climb on down. Inside, we see a giant fishman, and man, not a fan of these things. And I'm especially not a fan when they throw two of them at you at once. Luckily, shaman bone blades help a ton with this section, as we can turn them on each other and kill the victor of their little scuffle. Doing so, we get the Rakuyo, Lady Maria's weapon, and one of my personal favorites. Anyhow, we eventually make our way to this lighthouse where, traveling further on, we can now hear the bell toll. That thing the man in the dungeon was talking about. As we hear this, we will now be constantly invaded by Brador? I don't know how you pronounce that. This is a tad bit annoying, but it's not too bad. More importantly, as we reload the lighthouse, we can see our friend Simon on the floor bleeding out. He tells us he also heard the bell, and as a result, he was constantly hunted until the invader finally got the best of him. But with his dying breath, he asks us to end this nightmare, and he gives us a key. Taking this key, I decide we need to get revenge for our homie. Simon was a good man, and I refuse to let his killer get away with it. Back in the dungeon, we make our way to the cell that was previously locked to us so we can talk to our invader. He doesn't put up a fight, and his dialogue does little to explain why he was doing what he did. The only thing that can be gleaned from it is that he was protecting secrets. As to why he wanted to protect those secrets, who knows, but our boy is avenged, so we go back to the lighthouse. So not a ton to say here, but we travel through the dampened streets, killing the various fishmen, some of which can summon lightning now, which is, interesting. One thing of note, though, is that we can go to all the spots where Brador would have invaded us, and we can now safely pick up his gear for ourselves if you are so inclined. Making our way to the cave inside and further down, we find ourselves surrounded by snailmen. There's not a ton to say about these things other than they're absolutely disgusting, and I want to move on from this section. Make sure before you leave, though, you come down here and you grab yourself a nice blood rock baby. Woo boy! What's this, you might ask? Well, this is the final item that we need in order to level our weapon to +10. Including the DLC, there are only 4 of these in the game that you can get per new game cycle, which I find a little odd. All the other bloodstones they give out like candy, including the chunks once you start getting them. But the rock, for some reason, that has to be extremely rare and hard to come by. Regardless, you want this. It is possible to get one sooner if you're willing to deal with the chalice dungeons, but I'd rather have a weaker weapon before grinding those out, thank you very much. Anyhow, as we reach the deepest depths of this cave, we eventually find ourselves an exit overlooking a vast ocean. As we step out of our cave, we watch as this strange mass near the sea begins wriggling and moving. Something is coming out of it, and the imagery is haunting. This is the Orphan of Kos, or some say Cosm, and he is, in my opinion, the most difficult and best boss in the DLC. He is aggressive, using this weird thing, which I'm assuming is placenta that he's holding on to as a yo-yo, and it hurts. His attacks are quick and frantic. He can also reach into it and start throwing his placenta at us. It is both a disgusting visual and a devastating attack. And believe it or not, as difficult as this part of the fight can be, it gets even harder as we get him to about a third of his health. He takes a bite out of his and transforms. His attacks are even more wild. He can now jump into the air and slam down on us, call lightning, and he attacks much more frequently. It's a tough fight. I remember my first playthrough, this fight took me a couple of hours. Of course, as a vet, this time around, I got it after only a few attempts. It's a very well done fight, and I always look forward to it when I start the game back up. As we kill the Orphan of Kos, or some say Cosm, you may notice a black wisp coming from the corpse on the beach. As I'm sure you can infer, the body belongs to Kos, or some say Cosm herself, and the wisp hovering her body could possibly be thought to be her spirit. Slashing at it a few times, we get the message "Nightmare Slain," accompanied by a cutscene of our character overlooking the ocean. So this was the sin the hunters committed that caused this nightmare to spawn. Somehow Kos, or some say Cosm, ended up washing ashore. From here, the hunters found out about this, and upon discovery of the fact that she was a great one, they killed and harvested her, hoping possibly to learn the secrets in order to ascend themselves. Of course, they didn't know that she was pregnant at the time with her child, and on her death, it seems she made the nightmare for the old hunters to forever curse them to an endless hunt for their crimes against her and her unborn child. It seems that perhaps hunters like Maria were disgusted by what their comrades did and decided to keep the nightmare going as a way of repenting for their actions. But with Kos, or some say Cosm's, death in the nightmare, it can finally come to an end, and upon talking to the doll back in the hunter's dream, it seems even Gurman will sleep soundly tonight now that the nightmare is over. Of course, all of that is my interpretation. I am not VaatiVidya, so I can't go in all the details and do all the research to do it all justice. But anyway, upon his death, the orphan of Kos, or some say Cosm, drops the Kos, or some say Cosm, parasite. This weapon is what pairs with the previously acquired milkweed rune we obtained. It's a cool dynamic, but not one I'll bother with because it's an arcane build, and I don't feel like being weak until I get to the tail end of the game, because that's what's going to happen if you do an arcane build. Anyhow, with the Orphan of Kos, or some say Cosm, dead, the DLC is officially finished and we can go back to the base game. We make our way back to Murgo's loft, and riding the elevator up, we come to this platform, and in this door, in this door, the door right here, do I really have to do this? Oh, god damn it. Stepping through the door, we meet...
Kos. Some say Cosm.
This is Mikolash. This is the single worst boss in the game, and arguably in the franchise. This fight is literally just chasing a man through a bunch of hallways until he decides to lock himself in a room so you can finally fight him. Once you get him to half of his hit points in that room, he'll disappear, and guess what you get to do? I have lost all patience for this boss after 300 hours of this game, so I decide to handle him the real gamer's way. I take my poison knives out and throw them at this son of a bitch. Eventually, he'll go to the room automatically, but thankfully, I didn't waste a ton of time running around looking like an idiot. Mikolash slain, I rejoice at the thought that I will never have to do this boss again, until I inevitably decide to play the game again. The lore surrounding Miko is, confusing. All we know is that he is a part of the school of Mensis, as the cage around his head is known as a Mensis cage. One popular theory is that everything you fight in the nightmare were once people that attempted to contact the Great Ones, but became distorted because their minds were incapable of comprehending it. However, the Mensis cage that Mikolash wears allows him to enter the nightmare reality as himself, since it can, for some reason, keep his mind inside his head. Yeah, I don't particularly get it, but that's all I've got. Moving on from him, we continue on through Murgo's loft, where we can take this elevator and hop off here, starting a journey in order to pull this lever and finally get rid of that annoying mother brain. Yes, that's her name, that was causing constant frenzies. More importantly, going to the tower where she was, we can drop in and grab ourselves another blood rock, and the one you're most likely to get in a regular playthrough without the DLC. Nice! It is also at this time that we can go back to the area with all the short kings, and we'll find ourselves a brand new elevator. Hopping in and going down, we can say goodbye to depth perception, and no, a torch will not help you here. Just go in this direction and we'll find our mother brain. This is the only time we use the make contact emote throughout the entire game, and get this, it takes 30 seconds of standing there for anything to happen. Doing that, you'll get yourself a pretty sweet rune. Shame it came so late in the game, but what can you do? Also, if you kill the brain, you get yourself a living string, which you need if you want to fight Queen Yarnum. Moving on from that, we go back to Odeon Chapel to check in on our boys, and you may notice we're missing one. Concerned, we decide to look around. As we climb the ladder going down to the area where we fought Father Gascoigne earlier, we can find Ariana here with a brand new baby. She doesn't seem too happy about it though, and being the good Samaritan I am, we decide to go ahead and give her a very, very late term abortion. Doing so, we get ourselves another third of the umbilical cord. Sadly, this has tuckered poor Ariana out, so we take her shoes and we make our way out of here. As we go back to the area where Queen Yarnum was staring at the moon, we step into this plaza where we can hear a baby wailing its poor lungs out when, suddenly, an invisible cloaked figure appears out of nowhere, ready to fight us. This is Murgo's wet nurse, and this is potentially the final boss of the game, depending on some decisions we can make in a bit. But for now, as for the boss herself, she's pretty fun. Nothing compared to most of the DLC bosses, but she is fun in her own right. She has an attack where she constantly swings her arm and just walks in a straight line, which is funny looking but far from dangerous. She also has a second phase where she will summon purple mist, and in the mist, she will constantly summon clones of herself. They all die in one hit, and eventually the mist will subside, allowing you to kill her. Anyhow, after her death, the baby cries will cease and will receive the message, Nightmare Slain. As for the lore, I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Murgo was the child of Queen Yarnum and was, as a result of what happened so long ago, a great one. The wet nurse was tasked with watching the child, protecting it, and raising it in the queen's stead, and with the nurse killed, the child now has nobody to watch over them, resulting in their death and the end of the nightmare. It is also at this point where we gain the third umbilical cord. Yeah, I don't get it either, but you know what? I could use a snack. Back in the Hunter's dream, we see the place is ablaze and the doll lets us know that the dream and the night are coming to an end and that Gurman is waiting for us. Not wanting to keep the old man waiting, we go to the one area in the dream that was always closed to us. As we step inside, we see Gurman sitting under a tree where he offers us a deal. He'll kill us, therefore releasing us from the dream. We'll be a hunter no longer, and we can wake up, assumedly resuming our daily lives. If you say yes to this, congratulations, you beat the game. Murgo's wet nurse was your final boss. You did it. Of course, we say no because, well, there's more to do. We can't let things end like this. Otherwise, it'll all go down a massive spiral until everyone is gone. Gurman doesn't know that. He thinks that we've simply gone mad with blood, or maybe a comfort for the dream. Either way, the old hunter decides that if we won't leave peacefully, then he'll make us leave by force as he stands up and readies his weapon. This is Gurman, the first hunter, another potential final boss for the game, and my personal favorite. Not just from this game, not even from the franchise, but of video games in general. I love this fight with a passion. It's challenging. If you're not prepared, Gurman will kick your ass. But there's no bullshit. I can't think of a single unfair move he uses. No BS circumstances, nothing along those lines. Nothing he does comes out of nowhere. All of his attacks are clearly telegraphed, and he still manages to whoop your ass. Now that's a good designed boss. Not only that, but the music. Oh, the music is so good. It amazes me that for a fight like this, they chose something somber instead of something epic, because because the fight is a tragedy. Gurman means well. He wants you out of the nightmare. He's been stuck here for who knows how long, and he hates it. You can actually find him earlier in the game sleeping, having nightmares, begging to be saved, yet he can't possibly force someone else to take the burden of his place, so he alone has decided to bear it. He's unaware we have the means to end it for good, more on that in a bit, and so he fights desperately to make us leave. Fortunately, we do overcome Gurman, and with his final breath, it seems he's relieved that the dream is finally ending for him. Of course, that's not where it ends for us, at least. With Gurman's death, a being begins descending from the moon, a black, mangled creature unlike any we've ever seen. A great one, to be sure. If you hadn't consumed the umbilical cords before killing Gurman, the game would end here, with this creature taking us into its embrace and essentially just making us the new Gurman, thus continuing the cycle of the hunt. Of course, we did eat at least 3 of the umbilical cords, so we're able to push this creature off of us, and with that, we start the true final boss of Bloodborne. This is the Moon Presence, and compared to Gurman, he's kind of a disappointment. The boss isn't bad, far from it. I quite enjoy it, but it leaves a lot to be desired. The most notable attack this thing does is the one where it will instantly drop you to a single hit point, but we can still rally from that, and he doesn't do anything for a solid few seconds after doing it, so you got time to just hit him for free, basically. The only other cool looking attack is when he summons bubbles of blood. Otherwise, he's about on the same level as the wet nurse for me, but with his death, and with the final nightmare slain, we cut to the doll carrying a strange, squid-like creature. With her words and the trophy description, we can deduce that it's us reborn as a great one, and that we will lift humanity to new heights. For my final thoughts on Bloodborne, what can I say? I love the game. Is it the best Souls game? It's by far my favorite, but personally speaking, I separate what I believe is the best and what is my favorite. If you asked me to recommend a game to introduce people to the Souls franchise, this would not be the first game that comes to my mind. That'd probably go to Dark Souls 3. But for what this game is, it is, in my opinion, the perfect example of a flawed masterpiece. It has issues. Yeah, it's stuck on PlayStation at 30 FPS. Unless you have a PS5 and are willing to mod it, that will probably never change. Some of the bosses are just awful. Mikolash! And the Chalice dungeons are a slightly less bad version of Tartarus, and there is a lot less build variety here than any other Souls game, but it has the best atmosphere of any Souls game. I love how dark it is. I love the Victorian setting. I love the brutality of it all, and all the references you can spot to H.P. Lovecraft's work. Magnificent. The combat is the perfect pace for me. It's fast, but it's not so quick I can't keep up with what's happening. And while there is only one way to play the game, fast and aggressive, it chose to really hone in and perfect that style of gameplay. If you have a PlayStation 4 or 5 and you somehow haven't played this game yet, you're desperately missing out. For a long time, it was the reason to have a PS4, and for a lot of people, it still is. I cannot recommend it enough. Sadly, it doesn't look like a modern port is happening anytime soon, but hey, maybe now that Armored Core 6 is out, FromSoft can spend a year just moving the game to PC, even if it's the same type of sloppy port as Dark Souls was. It'd at least get more people to play the game. Unlikely, I know, but hey, a man can hope. Hey, what's up? It's 3 a.m. editing Billy here. If you hear sounds, that is my kittens playing on the couch. I don't know why they're up at 3 a.m., but cats be like that, I guess. Anyways, just want to say, hey, if you like the video, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. I've been editing for about 12 hours today, and then all week pretty much, and I am exhausted. So I hope after all this work, but more than anything, I hope you enjoy it. if you do, consider following me on Twitter, becoming a member, all that good stuff. Follow me on Twitch, you know, all the socials. They'll be in the description down below, or the pinned comment, whichever I decide to do. And other than that, take care, and thanks for watching.